Okay, so we're here at my local park. I have my camera here today. I usually don't bring this out, but I do want to capture my genuine first impressions of the Open IPC system, this new system in the FPV market. Well, at least new to me. I'm probably new to you as well, probably while you're watching this video. I have my VRX right here, and I have my directional antenna pointed over here where I have the most interference typically. For now, I'm gonna do a screen recording as well as decode to my goggles and see how that goes. And then the next time, I'll probably eliminate the screen recording to see if there's any better latency or lower latency and see if that makes any difference in my testing here. All right, let's plug the drone in and see if we get an image. All right, there it is, there's an image. Let's go for our first flight, Open IPC. Let's arm this puppy. All right, we're armed. We're in acro mode here. Let's see if this works. All right, here we go. Left, right, left, right. Not bad. It feels like a digital system. Now, I've been flying analog for a few days now, and this is one of the first times I'm flying digital. But it feels like a digital product, that's for sure. Meaning I can feel some latency, but it feels good, not so bad. I like the fact that the image is clear. A lot of contrast. All right, 720p, 120 frames per second. As I said, it's not immediate. It's moving. There we go. I feel some breakup there. I'll break up with some latency. Let's go over here. Obviously, the white balance is changing with this blue surface here. All right, so far so good. Let's go a little higher. Take a look at this picture quality. A lot of contrast, not bad. Still better than analog, I would say. Yeah, there is some delay here. All right, let's go a little further out here. We'll take it slow. How is that doing? Not bad, not bad. All right, over here is where I have the interference. Usually, oh God, I'm a little nervous. Oh man, dude, this is doing freaking good. Okay, there's some breakup, there's some breakup. But right here's where I usually have the interference. Right here, and it makes sense. I have all this buildings and metallic devices, all these parts here, steel. But it's not bad. 100 milliwatts. Now my screen is showing 4.2 megabytes per second, still 9.2 on the decoding. I'll be honest with you, the latency feels the same here than when it was close to me. So I don't think the latency has dropped off or there's higher latency. There's obviously some more image breakup. I can see some stuttering right there. Not bad. Yeah, some jerks here and there. And as I said, here is the hardest part of the whole flight. As you can see, it's breaking up. There it is, breaking up some more. It's more like a smear more than anything. All right, let's bring this thing back. I don't know where the battery life is. And then I think that was a pretty good, successful first flight, honestly. As you can see, not the clearest, but 720p. Yeah. All right, let's bring it back in here for our landing. All right, disarmed. Okay, not bad for a first flight. Let's get the drone and plug it. All right, I got the drone back here. Looks in good condition. For a first flight, that wasn't bad. It feels like a digital protocol for sure, not like analog or HD0, which is super instant. There is some variable latency, but looking at the screen, as you might see, if this thing records, I've been having some issue with my screen recording. If that did record properly or accurately, I'll show you on the screen. It still stayed at like 9.2 millisecond, and that's decode speed. I think earlier I said it was latency, but that's just how fast the actual phone can decode the camera image. There's no real, I don't know of a way to test or see the actual latency. And that's gonna vary obviously depending on how you get your image from your actual VRX to your goggles. So that's just too many factors in there. But for right now, I'm kind of pleased with it. With the first battery, not too bad. So I'm gonna try to go a little further, do some more exploration, and then probably do some freestyle and see if it's very responsive. For right now, I'm impressed at how far this thing went, especially in that area over there, with known interference. And it wasn't even that bad of a breakup, just kind of some smearing at the bottom and stuff like that. And then once I got a little higher, the signal came out pretty good. And these are just regular linear antennas, I think. So if you put some better antennas on another drone, you're probably gonna get better reception as well. So I'm gonna change the battery and go for another flight. Okay, so we're back from our flight test, and the Wyvern Open IPC by EMAX did a pretty good job, guys. Now, before I begin this overview of this whole system here, I do want to preface this by saying that this is not a full review. This is just a first look and my initial impressions. Now, this is for two reasons. One is because this is still an alpha product, and things can still change. I mean, heck, we don't even have goggles for this system, and this VRX doesn't even have an HDMI out. So we're still working with just kind of first generation products for this system. And then the second thing is that this is gonna be an open source system, so this is gonna change pretty much very soon. Maybe the next month or two, this whole information could just be obsolete. So let's talk about my whole experience with the Open IPC system. Now I'm gonna break this down into 5 categories, starting off with overall impressions, then latency, image breakup, penetration, and last but not least, image quality. So let's talk about the overall experience here. Now, as you saw in the video here, I did start off with this system right here, this VRX, and I did have some kind of a ground station just to make this overall more consistent. Now, I had this pointing in the direction where I have the most interference, and it did a pretty good job. Now, it wasn't the cleanest setup, and as you saw in my other videos, there's a lot of comments talking about all the wires in here. There was a little bit of wires involved in this whole setup, and this is an alpha product, so that is somewhat expected, and hopefully in the future we can clean this up overall. But there was a lot of wires to fiddle with, but overall it still ended up working. Now we did pop the drone, start recording. I did a screen recording, and I had the image going to my HD0 goggles, which turned out to be pretty good. This is a very good goggles, very versatile, and this should work with any of your other goggles with HDMI input as well. The image was very clear, guys. It was obviously better than analog. That's the first thing. This image is very clear, vibrant, and it's definitely better than analog. Now, as soon as I took off, I could immediately feel the latency, and we'll talk about that later in its own category, but it did feel like a digital system, talking about like Walk Snail or like DJI. And you could, it worked pretty okay, but you can just see that your inputs were not immediate and it wasn't snappy. Now, there's multiple reasons for that. We'll talk about that later. But yes, it wasn't as snappy as, say, analog or HD0. And we do know about that. HD0 and analog is just the standard for latency. And I said before, we'll talk about that in a short moment. But overall, the experience was great. It was just, hey, I don't want to lose this drone. I don't have any GPS on board. But overall, the experience was good, to the point where after a few minutes, I didn't really think about it. Meaning it was like, I didn't really feel like I was testing a new system. It just felt like I was flying FPV. It was that normal, that natural. But overall, it was a really positive experience, guys. A step in the right direction. Okay, so let's move to latency. And I know that's gonna be the highlight of this video. A lot of people want to know the latency on this system. If you look at my previous videos, the majority of the comments is talking about latency. How does it work? How long does it take to transmit the image from the screen or from the lens to your screen? And honestly, guys, I have to say that latency at this point, it does not matter. it really isn't. And for numerous reasons, as I said before, this is still an alpha product. And there's a lot of questions to be answered. So for right now in the goggles, it does show your decode speed, and that's pretty good, but it doesn't show your latency in the OSD. Now I wish the developers would put that in there. Now this is my specific app. I'm using the FP View app, and that one specifically does not have the latency on the screen there. So I don't know if the latency is going up or down. I can only determine that by the feel of the controls. So I wish that would be in the screen. That's the first thing. But we also don't know how latency is affected in the system. We don't know if, if you go behind a building, if there's any kind of environmental factors like moisture in the air. We don't know if distance has something to play with it, or if the power output, my antennas, like am I using a VRS, which there really isn't any on the market? Am I using a native goggle? Am I using a cell phone? Like me, in my case, I'm using a cell phone here to decode the actual image and then send it to my goggles. So there's just way too many variables. We just don't know, guys. Now, besides that, yes, there is latency. I can feel it. I can tell you that the latency is not that consistent. It's very inconsistent. There's no really rhyme or reason for it. As I said before in my video, my test video, sometimes I would fly and it would feel kind of delayed. I would go further away where there's known interference, and the latency would feel the exact same way as the drone right next to me. It does affect your performance. It does affect proximity flying. Even for my case, just doing some acro maneuvers, I wasn't really too confident with it just because I didn't know how I was gonna respond. Granted, I never had like a blank screen. I will talk about interference later, but never once did I just lose the image altogether, but just the delay in it where it can happen, I just didn't know. I'm sure with more experience, more time flying this, I'll get more comfortable just like any other protocol in the system. Now, before I came to record this video right now, after my flight test, I did do a little bit of experiment. I know I did say that latency at this point isn't really important, but I do want to, let me show you right here. Now, I have to say that this is not scientific by any means. This is literally an experiment. But here it is. I'm doing the latency test here, and I'm using my drone here. Now, this is just an experiment. This is not anything scientific by any means. You might want to wait for some other reviewers, like say Magtech. He's really good with testing this kind of stuff. And I know he got somewhere around 30 milliseconds. So, but that was with a different system. It was Open IPC, but a different system. But anyways, the way I measured this was pointing this to my iPad or a timer, a stopwatch timer. So this is the actual first image. This is the second image that's being processed. And then I usually take an HDMI out from my phone to my FPV goggles. This monitor here is gonna simulate my FPV goggles. This image is being transmitted via a HDMI cable. So it's gonna be first image, second image, third image. I'm seeing an average of 0.07 or 0.06 seconds, and that equates to around 60 milliseconds or so, 60 to 65 milliseconds of latency. Now, if I want to retransmit that image now to my goggles, what I'm seeing in my goggles, from the actual image to my goggles with this setup using the HDMI and a USB-C hub, we're looking at close to 100 milliseconds of latency. So that does add up. If it's consistent, it should be fine. And this is gonna vary. We can cycle through this. I did this with a high-speed camera, and you can see that the numbers are changing here. We're at 52 and 48. So now you can see instead of 7 or 70 milliseconds, it's now showing 60 milliseconds. Still changing. Now you can see 5652. This is showing only 40 milliseconds. So in this case right here, it's actually not too bad. It's showing 40 milliseconds from the image going from the camera to your cell phone, which is what you're seeing, which is not bad. 40 milliseconds, that's around DJI and walk snail. And then if you want to transmit that via HDMI using this system to my goggles, it's going to be, let's see here, that looks like 80 milliseconds. So less than 100, so 80 milliseconds, not bad. As we know, when you add HDMI to a system, it does have some inherent delay, obviously. Look at this one. This one is showing, it's about to change right here, you can see it, but 0.74, 0.71, so that's showing only 30 milliseconds. And then this one is still showing around 80 milliseconds difference to the actual HDMI cable. Okay, so you can do with that information as you please. As I said before, I don't think that's a very scientific test, and more in-depth guys with better technology will do even more intense testing, talking about first pixel, first line, first full image. You know, I don't have the technology to do that kind of testing. So as I said before, even if you do have those numbers, it could change based upon your setup, your phone processor. You know, it's just too many variables. So overall, guys, it wasn't bad. I can still fly the drone. I wouldn't do any crazy proximity quick timing. Say you want to fly through a moving gap, I probably wouldn't do anything like that. And obviously you're gonna have added latency if you have an HDMI out going into your goggles, guys. That's just gonna add to the latency. Now, I don't know how that's gonna behave if you have a native VRX or a native goggles. I'm sure it's gonna be a lot lower, guys. So just remember that. Okay, let's talk about interference and breakup. And I must say that this did a pretty good job, guys. I was flying this initially. You can see some breakup. And I have to say that with these antenna and this 100 milliwatt VTX, it did a really good job with the breakup. I had very little breakup, guys. And I have to say, as I said before in my video when I was flying, it's more like a smearing, and usually happens at the bottom of my screen, bottom left side of the screen. It's more of a smear than a breakup. Some other protocols have like pixelations and some have little sparkles. The analog has like the color shift and the waves going on. This one here is more like a smear. And it didn't last very long. It would come in and go pretty quickly. Sometimes I didn't even have to, raise my altitude, and I would recover the signal pretty good. Now, I did not experience a total loss of image. I don't know if it's because, we'll talk about that a little bit later, which is next, but maybe I didn't push this too far. But in my park, usually where I flew this, where it has the most interference, I still got an image, as you saw. There was a little bit of breakup and some delay, but once you got up, it came up pretty fast. I'm also curious to see how this thing here is gonna perform as well with some aftermarket antennas, and also with that 800 milliwatt VTX. I'm sure you're gonna get a lot better performance. At least I would assume so. Now, talking about the signal and VTX, let's talk about the penetration. This is where I was kind of blown away. This is a really big highlight or surprise for me with this system here. Now, I flew in two different places where I know there's interference, and this thing did a pretty good job. You saw the one where I flew at the park, and there's all these buildings, there's trees, there's all these play stuff for the kids, there's a bunch of fence, and I flew it really low to the ground, and it did a really good job. There was some breakup in the bottom left, but I'm pretty impressed by the penetration of the system. As I said before, it's only 100 milliwatts, and it really surprised me. Now, later I did some further flights, did some flights when I was home, and usually I'm in the back of the house, the backyard, and I would fly my drones around the house. So that's another test for me where most of my drones can't really make it around the house. Even sometimes ELRS would have a hard time maintaining connection. But for analog, HD0, walk snail, and then only the O3. If I have the original DJI system, then that has a hard time as well. I flew around the house once and I was like, okay, I'm ready for a fail-safe. I'm ready to lose image. And it just kept going. It was easy. So I said, that is not normal. That's kind of unusual. So I did another pass around the house. Same thing, no loss of image. I was blown away. And then the third time I was like, this can't be real. This is the third time, and I flew it even slower, and I still maintained the image at the most far end of the house. I was truly blown away. So I don't know what's going on here. I think the penetration on this is really good. And I think penetration does correlate to range tests as well, or range. Now, Mario FPV has done some range tests. He has actually a recent video doing like a 5-kilometer range test on this Open IPC system, and he did a pretty good job. So I think we'll be pleased with the penetration on this. If you want to fly bandos or something, this will probably be a good drone or good protocol for that, just because it seems like it's doing pretty well with penetrating through concrete. So overall, penetration it's good so far for alpha product. All right, let's move on to the camera here, which is going to be the image quality. Now, the image on this was pretty good. As I said before in the beginning, it's better than analog. I wouldn't put it on the same category as DJI or Walk Snail. Now, I have to say that I was flying this in the recommended setting by EMAX, and this is 720p. You can also get this in 1080p, and you'll have a better image. The image going to my goggle is not as good as the recording going to my DVR in the phone. Now this app, the FP View app, has a record function, and you can record the image from the camera without the OSD layout, and that's a lot better than the image, especially if you're gonna screen grab the image on your phone here. So that was pretty good, not bad for 720p. I'm sure it's gonna be better with 1080p. The image is good, guys. It is a digital system, so there's no real flaws there. Now, the only thing I noticed was when I was flying near the basketball court, the court is painted in blue paint. It would aggressively change the white balance on the camera. Now, I do have it set to auto white balance, but it has a pretty dramatic shift. So I do recommend that if you know your environment that you're flying in, just keep it at a fixed white balance. For me, I'm flying in usually 90% of the time in like cloudless skies, so sunlight, so around 56K. If I just lock that in, I'm sure we're gonna have a better image on here. Now, as far as the colors in the camera, it was pretty good, not too bad at all. Now, the sharpness was pretty high, so I wish I could lower the sharpness a little bit and the contrast. But overall, I think this did a pretty good job. I do think that this is not really a factor in the whole Open IPC, only because the cameras can be changed. These have a MIPI cable in the back, and you'll have, I'm sure, a Starlight camera in the future, maybe a high-res camera in the future. So the camera really isn't a big deal. I do wish the image was a little bit, I would say, clearer. And that could be due to my system specifically. I did notice that the lens was a little bit loose. It's now tight. So I don't know if this lens is in focus. So I'll probably do some further testing, trying to focus this lens on here and see if that makes any significant difference to the clarity of my image. But so far, guys, the image on here was pretty good. Okay, so overall, what do I think about the Wyvern system and Open IPC as a whole? Well, I think this is a really good start. Now, Open IPC has been in existence for a while. It's just now coming to the forefront due to the fact that manufacturers now are joining on this project, whether it be RunCam or EMAX. And I do think that this system here has a lot of potential. My experience overall was not bad. The fact that they're making this available to now the average consumer is a good step, or a step in the right direction. The camera here is good. The penetration is amazing. There is some latency involved, guys. Yes, there is some latency, and it is variable. Maybe they can make this a little bit more consistent. The breakup isn't too bad. I like the way how it breaks up. It just kind of like smears a little bit. This is open source, and I do think that manufacturers will jump on to make more products for this protocol. Now, having said that, we do need some kind of goggles for this system. I think that's the next step in moving this forward, honestly. Maybe a VRX. There are some VRX on the market. They're not commercially available. You do have to buy the board yourself, do some soldering, do some programming, and then develop some kind of case, or 3D print a case to enclose the whole structure. So that's a little bit too many steps. Hopefully some manufacturers can jump on and do that. And that would help a lot with the latency of this whole system here, only because now that would have a native HDMI out opposed to some kind of a USB-C. Now, the next step would be to get some actual native goggles, and that would be even better. So now the image is going straight from the drone to your goggles and then straight to your screen. Now, this is all open source, guys, so the parts shouldn't be hopefully too expensive. And hopefully manufacturers can make a goggle something like what we have in the Walksnail system, the Goggles L, which is, yes, it is a box style goggles that is going to reduce the cost, but it is really affordable, and the image is pretty good. We're talking about a $199 goggles that performs as well as the original Walksnail goggles, and that's something that I think we need for the system to progress it even further. So overall, guys, my experience with this whole system here was great. I will be doing some further testing, changing some settings on the camera. It's only going to get better from here, which is a good sign, guys. And it's good to have options in this hobby. We have 3 current digital systems, and this is gonna be the 4th one, guys. So let me know what you think about this whole thing here down below. Are you surprised with some of the results here? Let me know in the comments down below, guys. So anyways, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.